This evening, it is the stage for our Any Questions panel. The Labour peer and trade unionist Mary Bousted, the president of the Resolution Foundation and Conservative peer David Willits, the Green Party MP Sian Berry, and the director of Popular Conservatism, Mark Littlewood. Do join us live from here at 8 o'clock this evening.
Thank you, Ben. Now, I just wanted to talk about yesterday's programme. I wanted to share it with you and make the necessary correction. We were reporting on the upcoming Runcorn by-election. A local reporter went through various national figures who'd been campaigning there, like Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer. Then she also said there hadn't been any senior Conservatives campaigning. Well, the Conservative Party has been in touch to contest that claim and to say there has in fact been a senior Conservative in the constituency, and they explained it was their party co-chair, Nigel Huddleston. 27 minutes to 6 now. We're listening to PM, but we'll have a summary of the news from Tina Ritchie.
The US has threatened to abandon efforts to secure peace in Ukraine. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, says America will move on unless there are clear signs a truce between Kiev and Moscow can be reached. Separately, the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, said he remained optimistic about ending the war. One of the two British tourists who died in a cable car crash near Naples has been named as Margaret Elaine Wynne. The second person hasn't been identified publicly. An investigation has begun into what caused a cable to snap. A government source has told the BBC that the rules ensuring drivers have adequate eyesight need to be reassessed. Yesterday, Lancashire's coroner described the current licensing system as the laxest in Europe, in response to the deaths of 4 people who were hit by cars. In each case, they were killed by a driver with poor eyesight. A court was told one of the motorists couldn't see his steering wheel clearly. Regulators have issued a warning about a common type of blood pressure medication being labelled incorrectly. Officials say a batch of lecanadipine has been wrongly listed as being 10 milligrams when in fact the tablets are double that. Sources at Buckingham Palace say no date has been finalised for President Trump's state visit to the UK, after he suggested it would take place in September. The BBC understands an invitation has been sent, but discussions continue about a suitable venue as well as the timing of the trip. And shoppers in the UK will no longer be able to buy Toblerone's dark chocolate bar. The manufacturer said the decision to discontinue the 360-gram version was a result of changing tastes. It's not known whether the announcements will apply to bars of other sizes.
Thank you, Tina. Each year, the world seems to be breaking temperature records. Last year was the hottest on record, breaking through, albeit for 1 year only, the 1.5 degree threshold, 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average temperatures. Now, while the world has made some effort to prevent global warming by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the truth is that apart from the COVID years, emissions continue to rise. They just go up and up. And in the US, there is some new thinking going on with regard to climate. It's being labelled climate realism, and it broadly says we need to prepare for significantly higher temperatures than the targets countries signed up to in the Paris climate talks. Climate realism says forget 1.5 degree warming or 2, it's 3 degrees by the end of the century we need to focus on. Well, various financial institutions are quoted as having started thinking about the effects of higher temperatures. And at the US Council on Foreign Relations, a major think tank, a new climate realism initiative has been launched this month, trying to think through the implications for US foreign policy. This was the launch video.
Within the lifetime of a child born today, major American cities could be uninhabitable, pummeled by disasters, or submerged below sea level rise of 7 feet. However, America and its advanced economy allies will produce a dwindling share of future emissions, so cuts at home are insufficient. The vast majority...
Well, that project is funded by a philanthropic group called Climate Works. These are not people who say climate change is a hoax. They are very worried about it. They want action to be taken to see off the worst. But climate realism says the targets we've set ourselves are simply unachievable. Let us talk about 3 degrees with Professor Jim Skee, chair of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a UN body, and Jim, we're so grateful for having your time on the programme. Well,
pleased to be here.
What do you make of people saying, you know, we really need to prepare for something much worse than the kind of target levels we've been talking about?
Well, we think that we've been making realistic assessments of climate change and climate change action for decades. And I think the point that we clear point we need to make is that adapting to climate change and pursuing ambitious emission reductions are not alternatives to each other. They're complementary strategies. And there's nothing inconsistent about striving to keep global warming down to 1.5 degrees while preparing against the contingency that actual warming might be higher. So all the reports we have done encompass both possibilities. They cover adaptation and they cover reducing emissions.
Right, and I think all these climate realists, these are, as I say, they're not climate change denialists or anything like that. I think they would be very happy if we could agree more measures to reduce emissions. Can we talk about, though, is 3 degrees at the end of the century, is that a possibility?
In our last report, we estimated that if the world carried on with the current policies that we have, it's around 3 degrees warming that we would end up with at the end of the century. Now, it's not for us, for scientists, to recommend any particular warming level, but clearly some people might make the judgment that it's worthwhile investing, hedging against the possibility that that level of warming might occur. And indeed, we're not well adapted to the current climate we have, wildfires, extreme weather, etc. So a lot of adaptation makes sense now, regardless of where we are going to be by the end of the century.
Right. I mean, do you feel 2 degrees is pretty well unachievable? Because I think that's where the realists, or these new climate realists compared to you, would probably be more extreme. It's not going to happen, they'd say. There's no way we're going to agree enough to keep it below that. What do you make of that claim?
It is limiting warming to 2 degrees is achievable across the century. It's quite possible to do it if we are determined enough to put in place the measures that reduce emissions or increasingly take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's possible. This one is down to political will. It's not down to the science.
Okay. Can we talk about if we should focus our minds on 3 degrees, maybe to just remind ourselves as to why we don't want it? What does 3 degrees imply? What would it imply, for example, for sea level?
Well, I mean, the sea levels are going to rise anyway because there's a kind of a flywheel effect in the Earth system. So sea level is going to rise, but we're looking at much higher levels of sea rise going beyond the year 2100 because we're locked into that for a long period of time. I think the other worries would be things like, extreme weather, flooding, which is not just caused by sea level rise, it's rainfall events as well. And by 3 degrees, you're looking into pretty severe effects, for example, on the yields of some of the world's staple crops like rice, maize, wheat, etc. So that's the kind of world that we would be moving into if we don't do something to reduce emissions.
And would it change, for example, when you get to that level, do you hit tipping points where suddenly you move currents and airflows, jet streams and the like, and you suddenly find there are all sorts of really unpredictable effects?
I mean, what we have said is that it is probably unlikely that you're going to see some of these tipping points this century, but we can't rule out the possibility. So the slowing of the North Atlantic circulation, which could actually result in lower temperatures here in northwestern Europe, the melting of the Greenland ice sheets, the fact that some of the permafrost areas may start to release methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, and create a positive feedback effect in terms of climate change. These are all the kind of things that we would need to worry about.
Is it helpful for people to talk about 3 degrees as a way of maybe concentrating minds on avoiding it, or is it unhelpful because it sort of almost implies giving up on trying to fight climate change as opposed to just adapt to it?
I think that what we've done in terms of messaging the science is to ensure that we are talking about a bracket of warming that probably goes between about 1.5 and 3 degrees. As you said in the introduction, we're almost at 1.5 degrees at the moment, and if we do nothing, as we carry on as we are, we're on our way for 3 degrees. So that's kind of the bracket that we need to think about. And really, the implications of the world warming by 3 degrees are pretty severe. So it's a pretty unthinkable world we would be leaving to our children and grandchildren.
Professor Sajimski, Chair of the IPCC. Good to talk to you today. Thank you so much. Abrego Garcia has become famous in the US in recent weeks without Kilmer himself seeking fame or notoriety. He's a 29-year-old from El Salvador who entered the US illegally in 2012. He lived in the US for 14 years, had 3 children, worked in construction, according to court records. Over his years in the US, though, he's been accused of being a member of an El Salvadorian-linked gang, MS-13. It's now become a prescribed terrorist group under President Trump. Abrego Garcia denies membership of it. Now, there have been accusations of other offences, but he's never been convicted of a crime and was never deported. And that was partly because a court gave him protection from being sent back to El Salvador, where he said there was a different gang that had been threatening him. So, he was in the US until mid-March, when President Trump's desire to deport foreign criminals, when serving that desire, staff from US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, they picked him up and he was soon dispatched to El Salvador and a notorious mega prison there. Earlier this week, indeed, the Salvadorian president, Nayib Bukele, visited the White House and made clear he has no plans to allow Kilmer Garcia to return.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it.
So you can release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people.
Well, that was President Trump and Bukele there talking about the case in the Oval Office. It's become huge in the US. No due process has been granted to him, and when courts have got involved, including the US Supreme Court, they've tended to say that at least the administration should make an effort to get him back. Let's catch up on this with Adam Liptak, the Supreme Court correspondent for the New York Times. First, just take us, what have the courts said about this case, Adam? Because it seems it's been through several of them.
So a key thing to remember here is there are accusations that he may have done bad things. He has no criminal record in El Salvador. He has no criminal record in the United States. And an immigration judge ruled specifically and directly that he may not be deported to El Salvador. And yet he was deported to El Salvador. That is wrong and lawless, whatever else you can say. So the courts have tried to walk a line of saying we're not going to impinge on the deference owed to the executive branch in conducting foreign policy. But you have to take steps. You have to try to facilitate returning him to the U.S. And then if you want to prosecute him for wrongdoing, go ahead. If you want to deport him somewhere else, go ahead. If you want to go back to the immigration judge and say you made the wrong decision because he's a bad guy, go ahead. But you can't snatch someone off the streets and send them to a terror prison without some kind of opportunity for this guy to make his case that he should not be sent abroad.
All right. And a senator from Maryland has, in fact, just gone and visited him. Chris Van Hollen has just been over there, and this is really the first picture anyone's had of him since he was locked up in that jail.
That's right. There was a photo that apparently was in part staged by the El Salvadoran government because they're in a pleasant-looking setting, and everything we know about this prison is that, as one American judge put it, it's one of the most squalid and dangerous prisons in the world.
Right. Adam, thank you for that. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Rena Gandhi, who's an immigration attorney based in Virginia, a partner at Mari Orcio PLLC. She, in fact, represents Kilmer Abrego Garcia. Talked to her about him, and I started by asking about his condition.
We've not spoken with him, counselor or family. However, the Senator Van Hollen from Maryland, was able to have a short conversation with him, and I believe he'll be talking more about that later this evening. Beyond those photos, though, we have no knowledge of his current mental or physical state, but we do and are very happy to see, we do know that he is there, he is alive, and he, at least appears to be still going, and hopefully now knows that his family and his community, that we're fighting for him.
Is there a legal process by which you can get him back into the US? Because, of course, what the administration is saying is well, he's gone. He's nothing to do with us now. He's in El Salvador. What are we meant to do? Sort of parachute people in to pull him out of that prison? We can't do that. So is there a legal route to getting him back?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they've done it before. We regularly liaise with foreign countries to help facilitate the return of U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, foreign nationals.
I mean, obviously, President Bukele of El Salvador, he seems to be a very good friend of President Trump and taking a very President Trump view of it all, indeed sort of somewhat mocking the idea that he would give him up. And you would need his cooperation, wouldn't you, to get Kilmar out of El Salvador?
His and his government's, yes. Which is why the Supreme Court directed our government to take those steps.
To facilitate, was their
to
word.
facilitate, very specifically to facilitate his release from custody and return to the U.S. so he can continue under proper due process with the regular procedures.
He has become an absolute symbol of political division in the United States, hasn't he, over the lack of due process that obviously on one side people will criticise, and the desire of others to get foreign criminals alleged out of the country. Can I ask you, Rena, are you sure that Kilmer Abrego Garcia has no connection to any gangs, criminal gangs, at all?
I have seen no evidence. The government, through social media, has put out what they have. None of that is persuasive evidence. There was a hearing. There were actually 2 days of hearings where a judge thoroughly reviewed what the government chose, and the Trump administration back in 2019 chose to waive appeal. They didn't want to push it further. But more than that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because this is not the procedure. Bring him back. Let him make his case. The government is welcome to put whatever evidence they have. Again, we haven't seen anything. And let a judge decide.
Yeah, so you're happy for the issue to be litigated in the United States, for which he obviously has to come back and defend himself against the charges. What about...
Correct, which is what the Supreme Court said.
Yeah.
Correct, sorry.
What about, Rena, you? I mean, multiple members of the administration have said he's a criminal, he's a terrorist, he is all those things. Well, Rena, why don't you sue them for defamation and just litigate it? I know that's not a procedure to get him out, but just litigate it that way, and then, in a way, that would, if you win that, be embarrassing enough for them, surely, to have to then make efforts to get him back.
Because the nature of this case is so politicized and the nature of this case is so sensitive, he is in a foreign country. At this time, I have to believe in the rule of law. I have to believe in, the government attorneys following their ethical obligations to move this case forward as directed.
Let's just think about what this case says about the administration and American justice at the moment, because it is being seen as a very, very important case.
I agree. I do think this case is kind of a window into what could happen next. And I think that's why, earlier you said it's divided the country. I would disagree. If anything, I think it's put people on opposite sides in many different sides together. I've been getting emails and messages from veterans who said they, voted for Trump, who are appalled at this. So I actually don't think it's dividing our country. I think, if anything, it's showing what our country could be facing if the government is allowed to continue down this path.
Rena Gandhi there, the attorney for Kilmer Abrego Garcia. It's 8 minutes to 6. We'll have a last look at some other headlines. Here's Tina.
Sir Keir Starmer has spoken to Donald Trump on the phone, with Downing Street saying they discussed trade, Ukraine and Iran. A Slovenian court has declared the right-wing opposition leader Janez Janša of corruption. The Hollywood actor Ryan Gosling will be in a new Star Wars film set to be released in 2 years' time.
Exciting. Now, what makes a good day is the title of the research put out by University of British Columbia earlier this year. As it is Good Friday, we thought we might look at what makes a good day. And they, in fact, don't just list the activities. They try to estimate when things stop having a beneficial effect on your sense of a better than typical day. Now, broadly speaking, time spent socialising, time with family, and time with friends all had a big positive effect. There was little marginal benefit of socialising after about 1 or 2 hours, but the benefits of having extra time with friends, that kept on adding to the benefit of a day till 5 or 6 hours. One interesting one, time spent relaxing, was negatively associated with having a good day. Isn't that interesting? Presumably they think because most of the relaxing time was simply watching TV, and they found that working didn't actually impact whether you had a good day or not, and until it got to 6 hours. More than 6 hours work, then it definitely takes away from the day. But let's talk to Martha Newson, Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Greenwich and a cognitive anthropologist to boot. And Martha, I don't know, what makes a perfect day, or what makes a better than typical day?
I'd much prefer the better than typical day, because as soon as we say it's perfect, the pressure is on, isn't it? And we're instantly judging ourselves and others around us. So a better than good day I can go with. I think this point around social time is critical. The authors had a lovely phrase, a seemingly boundless positive effect of spending time with friends. I thought it was beautiful. And it fits perfectly with our evolutionary story that we need to be around others to survive. So it's not surprising really that our well-being and having a good day involves being around others.
Yeah, and indeed family. But one of the complicated things is, of course, when you can spend time with family, that doesn't mean you're all sitting around the lunch table having a nice time. It can mean you're going to the cinema with a member of your family and you're watching. So there are lots of ways in which you can spend time for family. But clearly, family and friends, very, very important. We've been looking at emails, Martha. The people who have time to email obviously have got very, very pleasant lives, and 1 or 2 mentions of a glass of wine at the day's end. Lots of kind of nature, waking up to the birds singing and the sun shining. I can imagine that does, because it doesn't come into the paper. Nature, I think, would make a difference to the value of a day.
I was really surprised by this nature point as well, and it depends how the authors of the original research broke up the categories. So I think there were about 100 items in the American Time Use survey that they used. So they might have sort of clunked nature as spending time with others. They might have clunked it into the exercise category or relaxation alongside screen use, which might have been a bit of a dubious approach. I'm not sure how they did it. But spending time in nature, you'd think that would have come up there. So interesting to find that it wasn't.
That did come up in some of our emails. Jenny Denton says 3 things to enjoy. She actually says a friend of mine said her therapist had said this: achievement, closeness, and enjoyment. That's really back to social, isn't it? Having a little bit of social life in there. Tell us about. Go on.
Come on. No, it's in a really simple way. It's just friends and purpose, and the Camarados movement with Math Pot, they sum it up. It's just friends and purpose. It's a very simple recipe. Yeah, we can break it down into all these categories and how much time we should have on each one, but the message is quite simple, really.
Yeah, and maybe purpose is why relaxation doesn't seem to be the route to having a wonderful day. I mean, obviously it's nice to relax and to have a chance to relax, but actually the good day, or the better than typical day, has just got a little bit more to it than flopping down on the couch.
Yeah, and flopping down on the couch is quite different from meditation or time on the beach or swimming. You know, there's different ways to relax, and it really depends how they conceptualize that. And I think if you're alongside others, you don't have to be having a big conversation, just to be alongside one another. I think that can be enough to really get more out of relaxation.
You're this cognitive anthropologist. We always introduce you as that, Martha. Tell us about what hunter-gatherers were doing, how their good days were.
Yeah, so there's some wonderful research from a few years ago showing that hunter-gatherers spend a lot more time on relaxation. And we think of them as having very arduous lifestyles, and indeed many do, because they're sort of pushed to the edges of the habitable world. But within their typical day, they don't have to spend much time hunting and gathering to survive. We think that's probably relates to much of human history, where we've spent a lot of time pre-agriculture sitting, relaxing, socialising, laughing, eating.
Didn't have TV, obviously.
Rather than work.
Yeah.
Without TV, yes. Nature, scenery is our TV.
Well, look, thanks for your emails on this subject. So I'm scouting that, Graham had one today, both daughters here, all 4 grandchildren, wonderful, absolute bedlam. Martha, thank you. happy Easter and a very happy Good Friday to all of you.
Hello, I'm Andy Zoltzman, and this week on the first news quiz of the new series, I will be joined by Hugo Rifkind, Athena Kablenu, Zoe Lyons, and the freshly renationalised Mark Steele. Now I've got the news bingo card for the things that might happen over the next couple of months whilst we're on air this series. Here we go. Spot fines for dawdling on pavement set to raise £7 trillion in the next 12 months. Decent shout. 500-year-old tree murdered by chainsaw-wielding chain restaurant. Don't be ridiculous. President calms down. Not a chance. Find out how many we can tick off already in this week's news quiz. Tonight, 6:30 comedy on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
The fact the BBC was going to block BBC Sounds for people resident overseas, that has been delayed. No problem with that. That's not happening, or at least not happening for the time being, so you don't have to worry about that. Let's get some weather now. It's Thomas Schaffenacker today. Thomas.
Oh, thank you. Very good.